January 19th, 2024, 215th birthday of Edgar Allan Poe. Mr. Poe did a lot of different things with his writing during his 40-year life. Yeah, 40 years. Whew, jeez, that's a short life. Any book. But he's most remembered for his stories of mystery and the macabre. He left an impression on generations of readers who have explored the dark side of mankind through his works. Poe's work has had an huge influence on popular culture. Books and films inspired by his works are easy to come by, but he's also inspired generations of musicians who have been attracted to his melancholy writings. And our first story here, you'll see, is also influence from Mr. Poe. So we begin with The Raven. Once upon a midday sunny, while I savored nuts and honey, with my Tuscan whole milk, 1 gallon, 128 fluid ounces, I swore. As I went on with my lapping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at the icebox door. Bad condenser, that, I muttered, vibrating the icebox door. Only this and nothing more. Now, not to sound like a complainer, but in an inept half-gainer, I provoked my bowl to tip and spilled its contents on the floor. Stupefied, I came to muddle over that increasing puddle, burgeoning deluge of that which I presented to adore. Snowy Tuscan wholesomeness exclusively produced offshore, purged here forevermore. And the pool so white and silky filled me with a sense of milky ardor of the type fantastic of lost not known before. So then now, to still the throbbing of my heart, while gently sobbing I retreated, heading straightway for the tempting icebox door. Heedless of that pitter-patter tapping at the icebox door, I resolved to have some more. Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. This, said I, requires an extra dram of milk, my favorite pour. To the icebox I aspired, motivated to admire how its avocado pigment complemented my decor. Then I grasped its wood-grain handle, here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams of many Tuscans I had known before. But the light inside was broken, and the darkness gave no token, and the only words there spoken were my whispered words, no more. Coke and beer, some ketchup I set eyes on, and an apple core, merely this and nothing more. Back towards the table turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping somewhat louder than before. Surely, said I, surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more. And from the window came a stirring, then with an incessant purring. Inside stepped a kitten. Mannerlessly did she me ignore. Not the least obeisance made she, not a minute stopped or stayed she, but with mien of lord or lady withdrew to my dining floor, pounced upon the pool of Tuscan spreading o'er my dining floor, licked and lapped and supped some more. Then this tiny cat beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grand enthusiasm of the countenance she wore, toward the mess she showed no pity, till I said, well, hello, kitty. Sought she me with pretty eyes that seemed to open some rapport, and so I pleaded, tell me, what it is that you implore. Quoth the kitten, get some more. Okay, so for those of you that have visited the Raven's Chamber in the past years, you may recognize this rendition as coming from an Amazon review of Tuscan Dairy Whole Vitamin D Milk. And I promise the rest is all pure Poe. But I just couldn't resist, because it's such a fun little tale, The Kitten. Yes, Edgar Allan Poe's life was almost as troubled as some of his writings. Death and failure surrounded him. He fought alcohol or drug abuse for most of his adult life. Could it be that the best art comes from the most troubled souls? Well, Edgar Allan Poe certainly supports that notion. And so now we present Lenore, a delicate poem reflecting on the death at a young age of the fair Lenore. Of course, the Lenore remembered here is the same rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, who was mourned in Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. Ah, broken is the golden bowl, the spirit flown forever. Let the bell toll, a saintly soul floats on this Stygian river. And guide of Veer hast no tear, weep now or nevermore. See, on yon drear and rigid bier, low lies thy love Lenore. Come, let the burial rite be did, the funeral song be sung, an anthem for the queenly is dead that ever died so young, a dirge for her that doubly dead and that she died so young. Wretches, ye loved her for her wealth and hated her for her pride, and when she fell in feeble health ye blessed her that she died. How shall the ritual then be read, the requiem how be sung, by you, by yours, the evil eye, by yours, the slanderous tongue, that did to death that innocent that died and died so young? Peccavimus, but rave not thus, and let a Sabbath song go up to God so solemnly the dead may feel so wrong. The sweet Lenore hath gone before with hope that flew beside, leaving thee wild for the dear child that should have been thy bride. For her, the fair and debonair, that now so lowly lies, the life upon her yellow hair, but not within her eyes. The life is still there upon her hair, but the death upon her eyes. Avaunt, tonight my heart is light, no dirge will I upraise, but waft the angel on her flight with the pain of old days. Let no bell toll, let her sweet soul, amid its mellowed hearth, should catch the note as it doth float up from the damned earth. To friends above, from fiends below, the indignant ghost is riven from hell into a high estate far up within the heaven, from grief and groan to a golden throne beside the King of Heaven. Okay, let's do one more poem and then we'll get on with some story stuff. How's that sound? Hello, stranger. You're no stranger to these bots. Good to see you. The next one is Ulalume. Like many of Poe's later poems, Ulalume has a strong sense of rhythm and musicality. It's the verses are they say sonorous, rhymey, if you will, the kind that read the way you're not supposed to read poetry, but he intentionally meant them to be read that way. They're built around sound to keep feelings of sadness and anguish. Ulalume was written the same year Poe's wife Virginia died, perhaps contributing to the poem's somber mood. The skies, they were ashen and sober. The leaves, they're crisped and sere. The leaves, they're withering and sere. It was a night in the lonesome October of my most immemorial year. It was hard by the dim lake of Auber in the misty mid-region of Weir. It was down by the dank tarn of Auber in the ghoul-haunted woodland of Weir. Here once through an alley titanic of cypress I roam with my soul, of cypress with Psyche my soul. These were days when my heart was volcanic as the scoriac rivers that roll, as the lavas that restlessly roll, their sulphurous currents down Yannick, in the ultimate climes of the pole, that groan as they roll down Mount Yannick in the realms of the boreal pole. Our talk had been serious and sober, but our thoughts, they were palsied and seared. Our memories were treacherous and sear, for we knew not the month was October, and we marked not the night of the year, our night of all nights in the year. We noted not the dim lake of Auber, though once we had journeyed down here. We remembered not the dank tarn of Auber, nor the ghoul-haunted woodland of Weir. Now as the night was senescent, and the star-dials pointed to morn, as the star-dials hinted of morn, at the end of our path a liquescent and nebulous lustre was born, out of which a miraculous crescent arose the duplicate horn, Astartes be diamond crescent, distinct with its duplicate horn. And I said, she is warmer than Diane, she rolls through an ether of sighs, she revels in a region of sighs. She has seen that the tears are not dry on those cheeks, where the worm never dies, and has come past the stars of the lion to point us the path to the skies, to the Lithian paths and peace of the skies. Come up in despite of the lion, to shine on us with very bright eyes, to come up with the lair of the lion, with love in her luminous eyes. But Psyche, uplifting her finger, said sadly, this star I mistrust. Her pallor I strangely mistrust. O hasten, O let us not linger, O fly, let us fly, for we must. In terror she spoke, letting sink her wings till they trailed in the dust. In agony sobbed, letting sink her plumes till they trailed in the dust, till they sorrowfully trailed in the dust. I replied, "This is nothing but dreaming. Let us on by this tremulous light. Let us bathe in this crystalline light. Its symbolic splendor is beaming with hope and in beauty tonight. See, it flickers up the sky through the night. Ah, we safely may trust to its gleaming, and be sure it will lead us aright. We safely may trust to a gleaming that cannot by guide us aright, since it flickers up to heaven through the night." And thus I pacified Psyche and kissed her, and tempted her out of her gloom, and conquered her scruples and gloom. Then we passed to the end of the vista, but were stopped by the door of a tomb. By the door of a legended tomb, and I said, "What is written, sweet sister, on the door of this legended tomb?" She replied, "Ulalume, Ulalume, 'tis the vault of thy loss, Ulalume." Then my heart it grew ashen and sober, as the leaves were crisped and sere, as the leaves were withering and sere, and I cried, "It was surely October, on this very night of last year, that I journeyed down here, that I brought a dead burden down here, on this night of all nights in the year. Oh, what demon has tempted me here? Well, I know now this dim lake of Auber, this misty mid-region of Weir. Well, I know now this dank tarn of Auber, and this ghoul-haunted woodland of Weir." Said we then, the two then, "Ah, can it have been that the woodlandish ghouls, the pitiful, the merciful ghouls, to bar up our way and to ban it, from the secret that lies in these wolds, from the thing that lies hidden in these wolds, had drawn up the spectre of a planet from the limbo of lunary souls, this sinfully scintillant planet from the hell of the planetary souls?" And that's Ulalume, one that you don't hear all that often. But it's Poe and it's good, so there we go. And let's see who just popped in here. Hey, Cart, welcome. Okay, so now on to stories. One of my very, very favorite stories from the Master of Macabre. In fact, Poe used a lot of wonderful language, and this time that and his time being somewhat removed from our own 215 years, language evolves. So in the next story, and I'm sure most of you here know this already, but a cask or a pipe is simply a small barrel, and amontillado is a specific type of Spanish sherry. So this story could be called Barrel of Wine, but Cask of Amontillado has a much better ring, don't you think? The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You, who so well know the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that I gave an utterance to that threat. At length I would be avenged. This was a point definitely settled. But the very definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong. Now, it must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was my wont, to smile in his face, and he did not perceive that my smile now was at the thought of his immolation. He had a weak point, this Fortunato. Although in other regards he was a man to be respected, and even feared. Fortunato prided himself in his connoisseurship in wine. Well, few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit. For the most part, their enthusiasm is adopted to suit the time and opportunity to practice imposture upon the British and Austrian millionaires. In painting and gemmary, Fortunato, like his countrymen, was a quack. But in the matter of old wines, he was sincere. In this respect, I did not differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself, and I bought largely whenever I could. It was about dusk one evening, during the supreme madness of the carnival season, that I encountered my friend. He accosted me with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking much. The man wore motley. He had on a tight-fitting party-striped dress, and his head was surmounted by the conical cap and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hand. I said to him, "My dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. How remarkably well you are looking today, my friend. But I have received a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts." "How?" he said.
Amontillado, a pipe, impossible, in the middle of carnival.
I have my doubts, I replied, and I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price without consulting you in the matter. But you were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing the bargain.
Amontillado,
I have my doubts.
Amontillado,
I must satisfy them.
Amontillado.
As you are engaged, I am on my way to Lucchesi. If anyone has a critical turn, it is he. He will tell me,
Lucchesi cannot tell Amontillado from Sherry.
Perhaps, and yet some fools will have it that his taste is a match for your own.
Come, let us go.
Whither?
To your vaults.
My friend, no, I will not impose upon your good nature. I perceive you have an engagement.
Lucchesi, I have no engagement. Come.
My friend, no, it's not the engagement, but the severe cold with which I perceive you are afflicted. My vaults are insufferably damp. They are encrusted with nitre.
Let us go, nevertheless. The cold is merely nothing. Amontillado! You have been imposed upon. And as for Lucchesi, he cannot distinguish Sherry from Amontillado.
And thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm, and putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a roquelaire closely about my person, I suffered him to hurry me to my palazzo. There were no attendants at home. They had absconded to make merry in honor of the time. I had told them that I should not return until morning. Then I had given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient, I well knew, to ensure their immediate disappearance. One and all, as soon as my back was turned. I took from their sconces 2 flambeaux, and giving one to Fortunato, I bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archway that led into the vaults. I passed down a long and winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. We came at length to the foot of the descent and stood together upon the damp ground of the catacombs of the Montresors. The gait of my friend was unsteady, and the bells upon his cap jingled as he strode.
The pipe.
Yes, it's farther on, I said, observing that he had somewhat one-track mind. But observe the white webwork which gleams from these cavern walls. He turned to me, and I looked into my eyes and 2 filmy orbs that distilled the rheum of intoxication.
Nitre?
He asked at last. Nitre, I replied. How long have you had that cough?
I thought
My poor friend found it impossible to reply for many minutes.
It is nothing,
he said at last. Come, I said with decision. We will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy, as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there's Lucchesi.
No! The cough is a mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough.
True. True, I replied. And indeed, I had no intention of alarming you unnecessarily, but you should use all proper caution. A draught of this medoc will defend us from the damps. Here I knocked off the neck of a bottle which I drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mould. Drink, I said, presenting him the wine. He raised it to his lips with a leer. He paused and nodded to me familiarly while his bells jingled.
I drink, he said, to the berry that repose around us.
And I to your long life. He again took my arm, and we proceeded.
These vaults are extensive.
The Montresors, I replied, were a great and numerous family.
I forget your arms.
A huge human foot the oar, and a field azure, the foot crushes a serpent rampant whose fangs are embedded in the heel.
And the motto?
Nemo meum pune lacessit.
Good.
The wine sparkled in his eyes, and the bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the medoc. We had passed through long walls of piled skeletons with casks and puncheons intermingling into the inmost recesses of the catacombs. I paused again, and this time I made bold to seize Fortunato by an arm above the elbow. The nitre, I said. See its increases. It hangs like moss upon the vaults. We are below the river's bed here. The drops of moisture trickle among the bones. Come, we will go back ere it is too late. Your cough.
It's nothing. Let us go on. But first another draught of the medoc.
I broke and reached him a flagon of de Grave. He emptied it at a breath. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw the bottle upwards with a gesticulation I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one.
You do not comprehend, he said.
Not I.
Then you are not of the Brotherhood.
How?
You are not of the Masons.
Oh, yes, yes, I said. Yes, yes.
You? Impossible. A Mason.
A Mason, I replied.
A sign, a sign,
he demanded. Why, it is this, I answered, producing a trowel from beneath the folds of my roquelaire.
You jest,
he exclaimed, recoiling a few paces.
But let us proceed to the Amontillado.
Be it so, I said, replacing the tool beneath the cloak and again offering him my arm. He leaned upon it heavily. We continued our route in search of the Amontillado. We passed through a range of low arches, descended, passed on, and descended again, arrived at a deep crypt, in which the foulness of the air caused the flambeau rather to glow than flame. At the most remote end of the crypt there appeared another less spacious. Its walls had been lined with human remains, piled to the vault overhead in the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris. 3 sides of this interior crypt were still ornamented in this manner. From the 4th side the bones had been thrown down and lay promiscuously upon the earth, forming at one point a mound of some size. Within the wall thus exposed by the displacing of the bones we perceived a still interior crypt or recess, in depth about 4 feet, in width 3, in height 6 or 7. It seemed to have been constructed for no especial use within itself, but formed merely the interval between 2 of the colossal supports of the roofs of the catacombs, and was backed by one of the circumscribing walls of solid granite. It was in vain that Fortunato, uplifting his dull torch, endeavored to pry into the depth of that recess. Its termination the feeble light did not enable us to see. Proceed, I said. Herein is the Amontillado. As for Lucchesi—
Here's an ignoramus,
interrupted my friend as he stepped unsteadily forward, while I followed immediately at his heels. In niche, and finding an instant, he reached the extremity of the niche, and finding his progress arrested by the rock, stood stupidly bewildered. A moment more, and I had fettered him to the granite. In its surface were 2 iron staples, distant from each other about 2 feet horizontally. From one of these depended a short chain, from the other a padlock. Throwing the links about his waist, it was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. He was too much astonished to resist. Withdrawing the key, I stepped back from the recess. Pass your hand over the wall, I said. You cannot help feeling the niter. Indeed, it is very damp. Once more, my friend, let me implore you to return. No? Then I must positively leave you. But I must first render you all the little attentions in my power.
The Amontillado,
ejaculated my friend, not yet recovered from his astonishment. True, I replied, the Amontillado. As I said these words, I busied myself among the pile of bones which I have before spoken. Throwing them aside, I soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials, in the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of that niche. I had scarcely laid the first tier of the masonry when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had in great measure worn off. The earliest indication I had of this was a low moaning cry from the depth of the recesses. It was not the cry of a drunken man, and there was then a long and obstinate silence. I laid the 2nd tier, and the 3rd, and the 4th. Then I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which that I might hearken to it with more satisfaction, I ceased my labors, and I sat down upon the bones. When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel, and finished without interruption the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th tier. The wall was now nearly upon a level with my breast. I again paused, and holding the flambeau over the mason work, I threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within. A succession of loud and shrill screams, bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form, seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment I hesitated, trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope with it about the recess, but the thought of an instant reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabrics of the catacombs, and I felt satisfied. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamored. I re-echoed. I aided. I surpassed them in volume and strength. I did this, and the clamorer grew still. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I had completed the 8th, the 9th, the 10th tier. I had finished a portion of the last and 11th, and there remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially in its destined position. But now there came from out the niche a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had difficulty in recognizing as that of the noble Fortunato. The voice said, "This is a very good joke indeed. Oh, an excellent jest, my friend. We will have a rich laugh about it at the palazzo. Over our wine. Over our wine, yeah."
"The Amontillado," I said.
Yes, the Amontillado. But is it not getting late? Will not they be awaiting us at the palazzo? The Lady Fortunato and the rest. Let us be gone.
"Yes," I said. "Let us be gone."
"For the love of God, Montresor!"
"Yes," I said. "For the love of God." But to these words I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, "Fortunato!" No answer. I called again, "Fortunato!" No answer still. I thrust a torch to the remaining aperture and let it fall within. There came forth in return only a jingling of the bells. My heart grew sick. It was the dampness of the catacombs that made it so. I hastened to make an end of my labor. I forced the last stone in its position. I plastered it up. Against the new masonry, I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them. In pace requiescat. Yes. But when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. Vengeance is sweet, isn't it?
So's the Amontillado.
Okay, so next one.
Oh, by the way, I should mention at the top of the hour, we're probably run a little bit over the hour. So maybe not much. We're just about close to where we should be.
Anyway, Mr. Edgar Allan Poe considered Morella one of his best short stories. In it, he tells the tale of odd relations between a husband and a wife. While offering few details, Poe paints a morbid portrait of identity, death, and marriage, layered with death and mysticism. Itself by itself, solely one everlasting and single. Plato, Simpos. With a feeling of deep yet most singular affection, I regarded my friend Morella. Thrown by accident into her society many years ago, my soul from our first meeting burned with fires I had never before known. But the fires were not of Eros, and bitter and tormenting to my spirit was the gradual conviction that I could win in no manner define their unusual meaning, or regulate their vague intensity. Yet we met, she and I, and fate bound us together at the altar. And I never spoke of passion nor thought of love. Morella, however, shunned society, and attaching herself to me alone, rendered me happy. It is a happiness to wonder, it is a happiness to dream. Morella's erudition was profound. As I hoped to live, her talents were of no common order. Her powers of mind were gigantic. I felt this, and in many matters became her pupil. I soon, however, found that perhaps on account of her Pressburg education, she placed before me a number of those mystical writings which are usually considered the mere dross of the early German literature. These, for whatever reason I could not imagine, were her favorite and constant study, and that in process of time they became my own, should be attributed to the simple but ineffectual influence of habit and example. Now in all this, if I err not, my reason had little to do. My convictions, though I forget myself, were in no manner acted upon by the ideal, nor was any tincture of the mysticism which I read to be discovered, unless I am greatly mistaken, either in my deeds or in my thoughts. Persuaded of this, I abandoned myself implicitly to the guidance of my dear wife, and entered with an unflinching heart into the intricacies of her studies. And then when poring over the forbidden pages, I felt a forbidden spirit enkindling within me. Would Morella place her cold hand upon my own, and rake up from the ashes of a dead philosophy some low singular words, whose strange meaning burned themselves in upon my memory? And then hour after hour,
would I linger by her side and dwell upon the music of her voice until at last its melody was painted with terror. And there fell a shadow upon my soul, and I grew pale and shuddered inwardly at those two unearthly tones. And thus joy faded into horror, and the most beautiful became the most hideous. The Hinnom became Gehenna. It is unnecessary to state the exact character of those disquisitions which, growing out of the volumes I have mentioned, formed for so long time almost the sole conversations of Morella and myself. By the learned in what might be termed theological morality they will be readily conceived, and by the unlearned they will at all events be little understood. The wild pantheism of Fichte, the modified the Pythagoreans, and above all the doctrines of identity as urged by Schelling were generally the points of discussion presenting the most of beauty to the imaginative Morella. That identity which is termed personal, Mr. Locke, I think, truly defines to consist in the saneness of rational being. And since by person we understand an intelligent essence having reason, and since there is a conscience which will always accompany thinking, it is this which makes us all to be that which we call ourselves, thereby distinguishing us from other beings that think and giving us personal identity. But the principium individualis, the notion that identity, which at death is or is not lost forever, was to me at all times a consideration of intense interest, not more from the perplexing, exciting nature of its consequences than from the marked and agitated manner in which Morella mentioned them. But indeed the time had now arrived when the mystery of my wife's manner oppressed me as a spell. I could no longer bear the touch of her wan fingers, nor the low tone of her musical language. I could not bear the luster of her melancholy eyes. And she knew all this, but did not upbraid me. She seemed conscious of my weakness or my folly, and smiling called it fate. She seemed also conscious of a cause to be unknown for the gradual alienation of my regard, but she gave me no hint or token of its nature. Yet was she woman, and pined away daily. In time the crimson spot settled steadily upon the cheek, and the blue veins upon the pale forehead became prominent. In one instant my nature melted into pity, but in the next I met the glance of her meaning eyes, and then my soul sickened and became giddy with the giddiness of one who gazes downward into some drear and unfathomable abyss. Shall I then say that I longed with an earnest and consuming desire for the moment of Morella's decease? I did. But the fragile spirit clung to its tenement of clay for many days, for many weeks and irksome months, until my tortured nerves obtained the mastery over my mind, and I grew furious through delay, and with the heart of a fiend I cursed the days and the hours and the bitter moments which seemed to lengthen and lengthen as Morella's gentle life declined, like shadows in the dying of the day. But one autumnal evening, when the winds lay still in heaven, Morella called me to her bedside. There was a dim mist over all the earth, and a warm glow upon the waters, and amid the rich October leaves of the forest a rainbow from the firmament had surely fallen. "It is a day of days," she said as I approached, "a day of all days, either to live or die. It is a fair day for the sons of earth and life, more fair for the daughters of heaven and death." I kissed her forehead, and she continued, "I am dying. I am dying, yet shall I live. Morella, the days have never been when thou couldst love me, but whom in life thou didst abhor, in death thou shalt adore. Morella, I repeat, I am dying, but within me is a pledge of that affection. How little which thou didst feel for me, Morella. And when my spirit departs, shall the child live, thy child and mine, Morella's. But thy days shall be the days of sorrow, that sorrow which is the most lasting of impressions, as the cypress is the most enduring of trees. But the hours of thy happiness are over, and joy is not gathered twice in a life, as the roses of Paestum twice in a year. Thou shalt no longer then play the Tien with time, but
Being ignorant of the myrtle and the vine, thou shalt bear about with thee thy shroud on the earth, as do the Mussulmen at Mecca. Morella, I cried, Morella, how knowest thou this? But she turned away, her face upon the pillow, and a slight tremor coming from her limbs. And thus Morella died, and I heard her voice no more. Yet, as she had foretold, her child, to which in dying she had given birth, which breathed not until the mother breathed no more, her child, a daughter, lived, and she grew strangely in stature and intellect. It was the perfect resemblance of her who had departed, and I loved her with a love more fervent than I had believed it possible to feel for any denizen of the earth. But ere long the heaven of this pure affection became darkened, and gloom and horror and grief swept over it in clouds. I said the child grew strangely in stature and intelligence. Strange indeed was her rapid increase in bodily size. But terrible, oh terrible, were the tumultuous thoughts which crowded upon me while watching the development of her mental being. Could it be otherwise when I daily discovered in the conceptions of the child the adult powers and faculties of the woman? When the lessons of experience fell from the lips of infancy, and when the wisdom of the passions of maturity I found hourly gleaming from its full and speculative eye? When, I say, all this became evident to my appalled senses, when I could no longer hide it from my soul, nor throw it off from those perceptions which trembled to receive it, is it to be wondered at the suspicions of a nature fearful and exciting crept in upon my spirit, and that my thoughts fell back aghast upon the wild tales and thrilling theories of the entombed Morella. I snatched from the scrutiny of the world a being whom destiny compelled me to adore, and in the rigorous seclusion of my own home I watched with an agonizing anxiety over all which concerned the beloved. And as our years rolled by, and I gazed day after day upon her holy and mild and eloquent face, and I pored over her maturing form, day after day did I discover new points of resemblance in this child. Yes, in this child to her mother, the melancholy and dead mother. And hourly grew darker these shadows of similitude, and more full, more definite, more perplexing, and more hideously terrible in their aspect. For that her smile was like her mother's I could bear, but then I shuddered at its too perfect identity. That her eyes were like Morella's I could endure, but then they too often looked down into the depths of my own soul, Morella's own intense and bewildering meaning, and in the contour of the high forehead, in the ringlets of the silken hair, and in the wan fingers which busied themselves therein, and in the sad musical tones of her speech, and above all, in the phrases and expressions of the dead woman upon the lips of she whom I loved in the living, I found food for consuming thought and horror, for a worm that would not die. And thus passed away 2 lustra of her life, and as yet my daughter remained nameless upon the earth. My child and my love were the designations usually prompted by a father's affection, and the rigid seclusion of her days precluded all other intercourse. Morella's name died with her at her death. Of the mother I had never spoken to the daughter. It was impossible to speak. Indeed, during the brief period of her existence, the latter had received no impressions from the outward world, save such as might have been afforded by the narrow limits of her privacy. But at length the ceremony of baptism presented to my mind, in its unnerved and agitated condition, a present deliverance from the terrors of thy destiny. And at the baptismal font I hesitated for a name, and many titles of the wise and beautiful of old and modern times, of my own and foreign lands, came thronging to my lips, with many and many fair titles of the gentle and the happy and the good. What prompted me then to disturb the memory of the buried dead? What demon urged me to breathe that sound, which in its very recollection was wont to make ebb the purple blood in torrents from the temples to the heart? What fiend spoke from the recesses of my soul when amid those dim aisles and in the silence of the night I whispered within the ears of the holy man the syllables, Morella? What more than fiend convulsed the features of my child and overspread them with hues of death, as starting at that scarcely inaudible sound, she turned her glassy eyes from earth to heaven, and falling prostrate on the black slabs of our ancestral vault, responded, I am here.
Distinctly, coldly, calmly distinct, fell those few simple sounds within my ear, and thence like molten lead rolled hissingly into my brain. Years, years may pass away, but the memory of that epoch, never. Nor was I indeed ignorant of the flowers and the vine, but the hemlock and the cypress overshadowed me night and day, and I kept no reckoning of time or place, and the stars of my fate faded from heaven, and therefore the earth grew dark, and its figures passed by me like flitting shadows, and among them all I beheld only Morella. The winds of the firmament breathed but one sound within my ears, and the ripples upon the sea murmured evermore, Morella. But she died, and with my own hands I bore her to the tomb, and I laughed with a long and bitter laugh as I found no traces of the first in the charnel where I laid the second, Morella. Well, that's an odd little story, isn't it? Morella. Okay, so I think we're on to our very last story. Take us up to the top and maybe just barely over. This is called The Assignation. Doesn't he? Especially when he talks about October. You know, oh, dear to my heart. Edgar Allan Poe talking about October. Can it get any better? Well, we'll see. The Assignation. This is one of Edgar Allan Poe's earliest stories, and is in fact the first true murder mystery ever written, though it was not recognized as a mystery at all for some 170 years. The originally accepted theory was that this story was a romance in which two lovers killed themselves in a suicide pact. Separated in life, they would be finally united in death. Stay from me, I will not fail to meet thee in that hollow vale. Exequy on the death of his wife by Henry King, Bishop of Chichester. Ill-fated and mysterious man, bewildered in the brilliancy of thine own imagination and fallen in the flames of thy own youth, again in fancy I behold thee. Once more thy form hath risen before me, not as thou art in the cold and valley and shadow, but as thou shouldest be, squandering away a life of magnificent meditation in that city of dim visions, thine own Venice, which is the star-loved Elysium of the sea, and the wide windows of whose Palladian palaces look down with a deep and bitter meaning upon the secrets of her silent waters. Yes, I repeat it, as thou shouldest be. Oh, there are surely other worlds than this, other thoughts than the thoughts of the multitude, other speculations than the speculations of the sophist. Who then shall call thy conduct into question? Who blame thee for thy visionary hours, or denounce those occupations as a wasting away of life, which were but the overflowings of thine own everlasting energies? Yes, it was at Venice, beneath the covered archway there called the Ponte Sospiri, that I met for the third or fourth time the person of whom I speak now. It is with a confused recollection that I bring to mind the circumstances of that meeting, yet I remember, how shall I forget, the deep midnight, the bridge of sighs, the beauty of woman, the genius of romance that stalked up and down the narrow canal. It was a night of unusual gloom. The great clock of the piazza had sounded the 5th hour of the Italian evening. The square of the Campanile lay silent and deserted, and the lights of the old ducal palace were dying fast away. I was returning home from the Piazzetta by the way of the Grand Canal, but as my gondola arrived opposite the mouth of the Canal of San Marco, a female voice from its recesses broke suddenly upon the night in one wild, hysterical, and long-continued shriek. Startled at the sound, I sprang upon my feet, while the gondolier, letting slip his single oar, lost it in the pitchy darkness beyond chance of recovery, and we are consequently left to the guidance of the current which here sets from the greater into the smaller channel. Like some huge and sable-feathered condor, we were slowly drifting down towards the Bridge of Sighs, when 1,000 flambeaux flashing from the windows and down the staircase of the ducal palace turned all at once that deep gloom into a livid and preternatural day. A child, slipping from the arms of its own mother, had fallen from an upper window of the lofty structure into the deep and dim canal. The quiet waters had closed placidly over their small victim, and although my own gondola was the only one in sight, many a stout swimmer already in the stream was seeking in vain upon the surface the treasure which was to be found, alas, only within the abyss. Upon the broad black marble flagstones at the entrance of the palace, and a few steps above the waters, stood a figure which none who then saw can have ever since forgotten. It was the Marchesa Aphrodite, the adoration of all Venice, the gayest of the gay, the most lovely where all were beautiful, but still the young wife of the old and intriguing Mentoni, and indeed the mother of that fair child, her first and only one, who now, deep beneath the murky water, was thinking in bitterness of heart upon her sweet caresses, and exhausting his little life in struggles to call upon her name. She stood alone. Her small bare and silvery feet gleamed in the black mirror of the marble beneath her. Her hair, not as yet more than half loosened for the night from the ballroom array, clustered amid a shower of diamonds round and round her classical head in curls like those of the young hyacinth. A snowy white and gauze-like drapery seemed to be nearly the sole covering to her delicate form. But the midsummer and midnight air was hot and swollen, and still no motion from the statue-like form itself stirred even the folds of that raiment of very vapor which hung around it as the heavy marble hangs around the Niobe. Yet, strange to say, her large, lustrous eyes were not turned downwards upon that grave where her brightest hope lay buried, but rather riveted in a widely different direction. The prison of the old Republic is, I think, the stateliest building in all Venice. But how could that lady gaze so fixedly upon it when beneath her lay stifling her own child? Yon dark, gloomy niche, too, yawns right opposite her chamber window. What then could there be in its shadows, in its architecture, in its ivy-wreathed and solemn cornices, that the Marchesa de Mentoni had not wondered at 1,000 times before? Nonsense. Who does not remember that at such a time as this the eye, like a shattered mirror, multiplies the images of its sorrow and sees in it innumerable far-off places, the woe of which is close at hand? Many steps above the Marchesa, and within an arch of the water gate, stood in full dress the satyr-like figure of Mentoni himself. He was occasionally occupied in thrumming at a tar, and seemed in way to the very death, as at the intervals he gave directions for recovery of his child. Stupefied and aghast, I had myself no power to move from the upright position I had assumed upon first hearing the shriek, and must have presented to the eyes of the agitated group a spectral and ominous appearance, as with a pale countenance and rigid limbs I floated down among them in that funereal gondola. All efforts proved in vain. Many of the most energetic in the search were relaxing their exertions and yielding to a gloomy sorrow. There seemed but little hope for the child, how much less for the mother. But now, from the interior of that dark niche which has already been mentioned as forming a part of the old Republican prison, and as affronting the lattice of the Marchesa, a figure muffled in a cloak stepped out within reach of the light, and pausing a moment upon the verge of the giddy descent, plunged headlong into the canal. As in an instant afterward, he stood with the still living and breathing child within his grasp upon the marble flagstones by the side of the Marchesa. His cloak, heavy with the drenching water, became unfastened, and falling in folds about his feet, discovered to the wonder-stricken spectators the graceful person of a very young man, with the sound of whose name the greater part of Europe was then ringing. No word spoke the deliverer, but the Marchesa. She will now receive her child, she'll press it to her heart, she will cling to its little form and smother it with her caresses. Alas, another's arms have taken it from the stranger, another's arms have taken it away and borne it afar off, unnoticed, into the palace, and the Marchesa, her beautiful lip trembles. Tears are gathering in her eyes, those eyes which, like Pliny's acanthus, are soft and almost liquid. Yes, tears are gathering in those eyes, and see, the entire woman thrills throughout the soul, and the statue is startled into life. The pallor of the marble countenance, the swelling of the marble bosom, the very purity of the marble feet, we behold suddenly, flushed over with a tide of ungovernable crimson, and a slight shudder quivers about her delicate frame. has a gentle air at Napoli about the rich silver lilies in the grass. But why should that lady blush? To this demand there is no answer, except that, having left, in the eager haste and terror of a mother's heart, the privacy of her own boudoir, she has neglected to enthrall her tiny feet in their slippers, and utterly forgotten to throw over her Venetian shoulders that drapery which is their due. What other possible reason could there have been for her so blushing? For the glance of those wild, appealing eyes, for the unusual tumult of that throbbing bosom, for the convulsive pressure of that trembling hand, that hand which fell as Montoni turned into the palace accidentally upon the hand of the stranger. What reason could there have been for the singularly low tone of those unmeaning words which the lady uttered hurriedly in bidding him adieu? "Thou hast conquered," she said, with the murmurs of the waters deceive me. "Thou hast conquered. 1 hour after sunrise we shall meet. So let it be." The tumult had subsided now. The lights had died away within the palace, and the stranger, whom I now recognized, stood alone upon the flags. He shook with inconceivable agitation. His eye glanced round in search of a gondola. I could not do less than offer him the services of my own, and he accepted the civility. Having obtained an oar at the water gate, we proceeded together to his residence, while he rapidly recovered his self-possession and spoke of our former slights, acquaintance in terms of great apparent cordiality. Now, there are some subjects upon which I take pleasure in being minute. The person of the stranger, let me call him by his title, who to all the world was still a stranger, the person of the stranger is one of these subjects. In height he might have been below rather than above medium size, although there were moments of intense passion when his frame actually expanded and belied the assertion. The light, almost slender symmetry of his figure promised more of that ready activity which he evinced at the Bridge of Sighs than of that Herculean strength which he has been known to wield without effort upon occasions of more dangerous emergency. With the mouth and chin of a deity, singular, wild, full, liquid eyes, whose shadows varied from pure hazel to intense and brilliant jet, and a profusion of curling black hair from which a forehead of unusual breadth gleamed forth at all intervals light and ivory. His features were more than which I have seen none more classically regular, except perhaps the marble ones of the Emperor Commodus. Yet his countenance was nevertheless one of those which all men have seen at some period of their lives, and have never afterwards seen it again. It had no settled predominant expression to be fastened upon the memory, a countenance seen and instantly forgotten, but forgotten with a vague and never-ceasing desire of recalling it to mind. Not that the spirit of each rapid passion failed at any time to throw its own distinct image upon the mirror of that face. But that mirror-like, retained no vestige of the passion when the passion had departed. Upon leaving him on the night of our adventure, he solicited me, in what I thought was an urgent manner, to call upon him very early the next morning. Shortly after sunrise, I found myself accordingly at his palazzo, one of those huge structures of gloomy yet fantastic pomp which tower above the waters of the Grand Canal in the vicinity of the Rialto. I was shown up a broad winding staircase of mosaics into an apartment whose unparalleled splendor burst through the opening door with an actual glare, making me blind and dizzy with luxuriousness. I knew my acquaintance to be wealthy. Report had spoken of his possessions in terms which I had even ventured to call terms of ridiculous exaggeration, but as I gazed about me, I could not bring myself to believe that the wealth of any subject in Europe could have supplied the princely magnificence which burned and blazed around me. Although, as I say, the sun had risen, yet the room was brilliantly lighted. I judged from this circumstance, as well as from the air of exhaustion in the countenance of my friend, that he had not retired to bed during the whole of the preceding night. In the architecture and embellishment of the chamber, the evident design had been to dazzle and astound. Little attention had been paid to the decor of what is technically called keeping, or to the proprieties of nationality. The eye wandered from object to object and rested upon none, and neither the grotesques of the Greek painters, nor the sculptures of the best Italian days, nor the huge carvings of untutored Egypt. Rich tapestries and draperies in every part of the room trembled to the vibration of low melancholy music whose origin was not to be discovered. The senses were oppressed by mingled and conflicting perfumes, reeking up from strange convolute censers, together with multitudinous flaring and flickering tongues of emerald and violet fire. The rays of the newly risen sun poured in upon the whole through windows formed each of the single pane of crimson-tinted glass. Glancing to and fro in 1,000 reflections from curtains which rolled from their cornices like cataracts of molten silver, the beams of natural glory mingled at length fitfully with the artificial light, and lay weltering in subdued masses upon a carpet of rich, liquid-looking cloth of chilly gold. Ah, laughed the proprietor, motioning to me to seat as I entered the room, and throwing himself back at full length upon an ottoman. I see, said he, perceiving that I could not immediately reconcile myself to the menaçance of so singularly a welcome. I see you're astonished at my apartment, at my stature, at my pictures, my originality of conception, the architecture and upholstery. Absolutely drunk, with my magnificence? But pardon me, my dear sir. Here his tone of voice dropped to the very spirit of cordiality. Pardon me for my uncharitable laughter. You appeared so utterly astonished. Besides, some things are so completely ludicrous that a man must laugh or die. To die laughing must be the most glorious of all glorious deaths. Sir Thomas More, a very fine man was Sir Thomas More. Sir Thomas More died laughing, you remember? Also in the absurdities of Ravicious Dexter, and there's a long list of characters who came to the same magnificent end, eh? Do you know, however, he continued musingly, that at Sparta, which is now Paracoria, at Sparta, I say, to the west of the citadel, among a chaos of scarcely visible ruins, is a kind of sorsal, upon which is still legible the letters E-E-E-M. They are undoubtedly part of T-E-E-E-M. Now at Sparta were thousands of temples and shrines, 1,000 different divinities, yes. How exceedingly strange that the altar of laughter should have survived all the others. But in the present instance, he resumed with a singular alteration of voice and manner, I have no right to be merry at your expense. Forgive. You might well have been amazed. Europe cannot produce anything so fine as this, my little regal cabinet. My other apartments are by no means the same order, mere ultras of fashionable insipidity. This is better than fashion, is it not? This has been but to become the rage. That is, with those who could afford it at the cost of their entire patrimony. I have guarded, however, against any such profanation. With one exception, you, dear sir, are the only human being besides myself and my valet who have been admitted within the mysteries of these imperial precincts. And since they have bedizened as you see, I bowed in acknowledgment for the overpowering sense of splendor and perfume and music, together with the unexpected eccentricities of his address and manner, prevented me from expressing in words my appreciation of what I might have construed into a compliment. Here, he resumed, rising and leaning on my arm as he sauntered around the apartment. Here are paintings from the Greeks to the Siambu, to the present hour. Many are chosen, as you see, with little deference to the opinions of virtue. They are all, however, fitting tapestries, are they not, for chambers such as this? Here, too, some chefs d'oeuvre of the unknown great, and here unfinished designs by men celebrated in their day, whose very names the perspicacity of the academies has left silence, and to me. What think you? Said he, turning abruptly as he spoke. What think you of this Madonna della Pietà? It is Guido's own, I said with all the enthusiasm of my nature, for I had been poring over it intently with its surpassing loveliness. It is Guido's own. How could you have obtained it? She is undoubtedly in painting with the Venuses and sculpture. Ha, he said thoughtfully. The Venus. The beautiful Venus, the Venus of the Medici. She had the diminutive head and the gilded hair of the Medici, yes. Part of the left arm. Here his voice dropped so as to be heard with difficulty. And all the right are restorations. In the coquetry of that right arm lies, I think, the quintessence of all affection. Give me the Canova. The Apollo, too, is a copy. There can be no doubt of it, blind fool that I am, who cannot hold the boasted inspiration of the Apollo. I cannot help pitying me. I cannot help preferring the Antonius. Was it not Socrates who said that the statuary found in his
statue in the block of marble. Then Michelangelo was by no means original in his couplet, non hala atamo artista alcun concetto, che un marmo solo esse non circumscrivo. It has been, or it should be remarked, that in the manner of the true gentleman, we are always aware of the difference from the bearing the vulgar without being at once precisely able to determine in what such difference consists. Allowing the remark to have applied in its full force to the outward demeanor of my acquaintance, I felt it on that eventful morning still more fully applicable to his moral temperament and character. Nor can I better define that peculiarity of spirit which seemed to have placed him so essentially apart from all other human beings than by calling it a habit of intense and continual thought, pervading even his most trivial actions, intruding upon his moments of dalliance, and interweaving itself with his very flashes of merriment, like adders which writhe from out the eyes of the grinning mask in the cornices around the temples of Persepolis. I could not help, however, repeatedly observing through the mingled tone of levity and solemnity with which he rapidly descanted upon matters of little importance a certain air of trepidation, a degree of nervous unction in action and in speech, an unquiet excitability of manner which appeared to me at all times unaccountable, and upon some occasions even filled me with alarm. Frequently, too, pausing in the middle of a sentence whose commencement he had apparently forgotten, he seemed to be listening with the deepest attention, as if either in momentary expectation of a visitor, or to sounds which must have had existence in his imagination alone. It was during one of these reveries or pauses of apparent abstraction that, in turning over a page of the poet and scholar Politian's beautiful tragedy, the Orfeo, the first native Italian tragedy, which lay near me upon an ottoman, I discovered a passage underlined in pencil. It was a passage towards the end of the third act, a passage of the most heart-stirring excitement, a passage which, although tainted with impurity, no man shall read without a thrill of novel emotion, no woman without a sigh. The whole page was blotted with fresh tears, and upon the opposite leaf were the following English lines, written in hand so very different from the peculiar characters of my acquaintance, that I had some difficulty in recognizing it as his own. Thou wast all to me, love, from which my soul did pine, a green isle in the sea, love, a fountain and a shrine, all wreathed with fairy fruits and flowers, all the flowers were mine. Ah, dream too bright to last, all starry hope that didst arise, but to be outcast. A voice from the future cries onward, but o'er the past dim gulf my spirit hovering lies, mute, motionless, aghast. For alas, alas, within me the light of life is o'er. No more, no more, such language holds the solemn seed to the sands upon the shore, shall bloom the thunder-blasted tree of the stricken eagle soar. Now all my hours of trances and all my nightly dreams are where the dark eye glances, and where the footstep gleams, and what ethereal dances by what Italian streams. Alas, for that accursed time they bore thee o'er the billow, from love to titled age and crime, and an unholy pillow. From me and from our misty clime, where weeps the silver willow. Now that these lines were written in English, a language with which I had not believed their author acquainted, afforded me little matter for surprise. I was too well aware of the extent of his acquirements and of the singular pleasure he took in concealing them from observation, to be astonished at any similar discovery, but the place of date, I must confess, occasioned me with no little amazement. It had been originally written in London, and afterwards carefully overscored, not, however, so effectually as to conceal the words from the scrutinying eyes. I say this occasioned me no little amazement, for I well remember that in a former conversation with my friend I particularly inquired if he had at any time met in London the Marchesa de Mentoni, who for some years previous to her marriage had resided in this city, when his answer, if I mistake not, gave me to understand that he had never visited the metropolis of Great Britain. I might as well here mention that I have more than once heard, without of course giving credit to a report involving so many improbabilities, that the person of whom I speak was not only by birth but in education an Englishman. As there is one painting, said he, without being aware of my notice of the tragedy, there is still one painting which you have not seen. And throwing aside a drapery, he discovered a full-length portrait
of the Marchesa Aphrodite. Now, human art could have done no more in the delineation of her superhuman beauty. The same ethereal figure which stood before me in the preceding night upon the steps of the ducal palace stood before me once again now. But in the expressions of the countenance, which was beaming all over with smiles, there still lurked that fitful stain of melancholy which will never be found inseparable from the perfection of the beautiful. Her right arm lay folded over her bosom. With her left she pointed downward to a curiously fashioned vase. One small fairy foot alone visible, barely touched the earth, and scarcely discernible in the brilliant atmosphere which seemed to encircle and enshrine her loveliness, floated a pair of the most delicately imagined wings. My glance fell from the painting to the figure of my friend, and the vigorous words of Chaplain Bosse de Bois quivered instinctively upon my lips. He is up there like a Roman statue. He will stand till death hath made him marble. Come, come, he said at length, turning towards a table of richly enameled and massive silver, upon which were a few goblets fantastically stained, together with two large Etruscan vases, fashioned in the same extraordinarily model as in the foreground of the portrait, and filled with what I supposed to be Johannisberger. Come, he said abruptly, let us drink. It is early, but let us drink. It is early. It is indeed early, he continued, musingly, as a cherub with a heavy golden hammer made the apartment ring with the first hour of the sunrise. It is indeed early, but what matters it? Let us drink. Let us pour out an offering to yon solemn sun which these gaudy lamps and censers are so eager to subdue, and having made me pledge within a bumper, he swallowed in rapid succession several goblets of that wine. To dream, he continued, resuming the tone of his desultory conversation, as he held up to the rich light of a censer one of his magnificent vases. To dream has been the business of my life. I have therefore framed for you myself, as you see, a bower of dreams. In the heart of Venice could I have erected a better? You behold it around you now. It is true, a medley of architectural embellishments, no? The chastity of Ionia is offended by antediluvian devices, and the sphinxes of Egypt are outstretched upon carpets of gold. Yet the effect is incongruous to the timid alone. Proprieties of place, especially of time, are the bugbears which terrify mankind from the contemplation of the magnificent. Once I was myself a decorist, but that sublimation of folly has palled my soul. All this is now the fitter for my purpose. Like these arabesque censers, my spirit is writhing in fire. The delirium of this scene is fashioning me for the wilder visions of that land of real dreams whither I am now rapidly departing. He here paused abruptly, bent his head to his bosom, and he seemed to listen to a sound which I could not hear. At length, erecting his frame, he looked upwards and ejaculated the lines of the Bishop of Chichester. Stay for me there, I will not fail, to meet me in that hollow vale. And in the next instant, confessing the power of wine, he threw himself at full length upon an ottoman. A quick step was now heard upon the staircase. A loud knock on the door rapidly succeeded. I was hastening to anticipate a second disturbance when a page of Montoni's household burst into the room and faltered out, in a voice choking with emotion, the incoherent words, My mistress! My mistress! My mistress! Poison! Poison! Oh, beautiful Aphrodite! Bewildered, I flew to the ottoman, endeavored to arouse the sleeper to a sense of startling intelligence, but his limbs were rigid, his lips were livid, his lately beaming eyes were riveted in death. I staggered back towards the table. My hand fell upon a cracked and blackened goblet, and conscious of the entire terrible truth flashed suddenly over my soul. And it's the Assignation, a romance in which two lovers killed themselves in a suicide pact to be reunited in death. Cheery little tale, isn't it?